Ivy doesn't have special needs. She has needs just like every other child does, and she deserves to have those needs met.
Hello, you're listening to The Rare Life. I'm your host, Madeline Cheney, and today we have Vanessa McLeod with her special topic episode about ableism and accessibility from her perspective as a parent. Now, I would like to first give an extra special welcome to those tuning in for the first time or one of the first times. I am genuinely very happy you are here. After enjoying this episode, I welcome you to browse whatever other episodes look interesting and meaningful to you. And binging the episodes is always allowed. As you may or may not know, I always encourage you to listen to the story episode first, as they are kind of a part one and part two of sorts. But for this one, it is especially important. Vanessa's story episode was very much a precursor for this episode. So if you haven't caught it yet, pause this one, listen to episode 69, and then come right back and finish this episode. You'll be glad you did. In this episode, Vanessa shares the many hurdles she faced in enrolling her daughter Ivy in preschool. We talk about how much more accessible society is to non-disabled people and children than their disabled counterparts. We dig into ableism and the ways that ableism contributes to the issues of inaccessibility. Vanessa's confidence in Ivy's ability to have a wonderful life full of ambition and fulfilled dreams is contagious, and I really hope you can feel that. Now, as a disclaimer of sorts, just as with any episode, I just want to point out and remind everyone listening that every circumstance, every child, every family, every diagnosis is unique. So our conversation may or may not reflect your exact situation or opinion, but I am 100% confident that there is much to be learned from this episode. So without further ado, let's get to the conversation. Hi, Vanessa. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
You are so welcome. So in our first episode, for anyone who is listening, they probably noticed this. We definitely touched on and dove right into the topic of ableism, which has a whole lot to do with your special topic all about accessibility. And we're going to talk about this in context of how you've experienced as Ivy's mom in these years and how you've recently kind of come up against it. So first, I would love, this maybe is a little too late, maybe we should have done this in the first episode, but I would love for you to kind of define what ableism means to you.
Yeah, this is definitely something that I have had to learn and, put the time into learning this and just listening to those in the disability community about what it truly means, because I know that my perspective is limited, but basically ableism is discrimination against somebody because of their disability or because of the way they're born. And it's, viewing their life as less because they were born different.
Awesome. I agree. I think like as parents, a lot of us are just kind of like sitting back and reading, I think for both of us on Instagram, different disabled adults who talk about this topic. And at the same time, I feel like we do have a unique spin on it as parents because we are not the disabled people, but we are advocating for our disabled children.
Yeah.
And so, it's a different flavor. I think it's a different flavor of advocacy and ableism.
Yeah. I feel like it's a fine line sometimes because you never want to speak for a marginalized community. You never want to speak for someone who's disabled. You want to listen to them and hear what they are saying because they have the lived experience. But when it's a minor and when you're the guardian of that minor, you have to speak for them sometimes. So it's a really interesting mix of, okay, connecting with other disabled adults and listening to them, but then also having to speak for a disabled child. It's a very fine line.
Yeah, I think you explained that really well. And a lot of people, that are listening right now have children who are disabled to the point where they may never speak for themselves. And so that, again, adds a really interesting layer. I know that for both you and for me in our situations, we are also modeling for our children. We're advocating for them right now while they can't really advocate for themselves. in hopes of teaching them something too, like self-advocacy.
Yeah.
And then there's also the group of parents, like I mentioned, who will continually be their child's advocate.
Yeah.
So I would love to chat about, I know this has like gotten you a little bit of publicity like in your hometown and stuff, but I would love to have you explain your first big barrier to accessibility for Ivy in the form of preschool and access to the education she deserves.
Yeah. This has been tricky, and I feel like there's a lot of different layers to it. But at the end of the day, I do have an older daughter, and I put her in preschool. And I want to give Ivy that exact same opportunity, because why wouldn't I?
Mm-hmm.
So, the first step was kind of talking to our team. We see a team at a local child development center. She sees a physiotherapist there, an occupational therapist. We have an infant development consultant, and we have a pediatrician. So, I first kind of spoke with them about it because they've been involved in her development. And I just kind of said, like, I think she's ready for preschool. Like, she's already so fiercely independent and determined. And she sees her big sister go off to school, and she's asking to go to school. And they were so on board with it. They think that it's going to be amazing for her. They think that she's going to just kill it. Like, they know her well enough to know that she really doesn't have any limits. But I was quickly told by them that in BC, there is very limited funding for support workers for preschoolers. So they will put me on a wait list when she's 3, but what limited funding there is limited for 4-year-olds. So I can go on a wait list at 3, but I'm not going to get it. And again, they'll put me on a wait list when she's 4, and there's no guarantee that we'll get it because the funding is so limited. So they almost kind of like shut it down pretty quick, which was disheartening. But like I said, I'm a researcher and I'm also a fighter. I reached out to other parents and I was like, well, what did you do? Did you find any resources? And so there is another program called the At Home program. It's through the Ministry of Child and Family Development in BC. So if your kid is dependent in 4 areas of life, so that's bathing, dressing, eating, and toileting, then you qualify for this At Home program. So that was a whole huge process in itself. It took us almost a year to get approved on this in this program. But through the At Home program, they'll help provide funding for like medical equipment around the house and things like that. And they also provide respite funding. So you're approved for this program, the At Home program, but then any funding still is not guaranteed. It's still limited funding within this program. You will still be put on wait lists once you're in this program.
Oh, wow.
So technically, Ivy is part of the At Home program. We are on a wait list for respite funding, and I want to use that respite funding for paying for a support worker for Ivy's preschool. Unfortunately, we're still just sitting on a wait list. They can't tell me how long we're going to be on this wait list for. I've heard from some parents that it's a couple years.
Oh, wow.
So I'm not feeling hopeful about it at all. So I'm just moving forward. So that's the whole big hurdle in itself, is trying to find funding for a support worker for a preschooler. Here in BC, it's basically non-existent. So that's unfortunate. And that's been a huge hurdle. And we're kind of somewhere, but also kind of nowhere because we don't have funding.
So what would happen if you just like went to a preschool and like, hey, I want to enroll my daughter Ivy? Like, is that where you need a support worker to help you with that? Or what does that look like?
Like, what is a support worker?
I guess what I'm wondering is like, if you went to a preschool and you said like, hey, I want to enroll Ivy, would they like deny her because of her limb differences without having another worker?
Yes. So here's the second part of like, the funding for a support worker. That was my first hurdle.
Yeah.
That's been a continuing process. The second hurdle I encountered. So my eldest daughter had gone to this preschool for 2 years. I loved it. It's a Montessori preschool. The teacher is amazing. She's so like kind and gentle, which I love. Like, I'm very much a gentle parenting kind of parent. And I loved her classroom. I loved her, the teacher. So, one day while I was picking up my eldest daughter from preschool, I kind of mentioned that I want to put Ivy in preschool, and her reaction was not what I was hoping for. She told me that Ivy would need a support worker. She wouldn't take Ivy without a support worker. And there were other conversations that happened. Some of them were disheartening. Some of them were a little more encouraging. But essentially, there's a lot of hesitancy from this preschool teacher. She's the owner operator / teacher. And, she said that she does have a lot of fear because she's never had a kid like Ivy in her class. And to be honest, I kind of laughed when she said that, because even Ivy's pediatrician has never had a kid like Ivy in his care, because she is quite rare. I'm lucky that I found our large community, but it is online and it's around the world. So locally, for our local pediatricians, they don't have any experience with a kid like Ivy. So I just kind of had to laugh when she was in place of fear because she's never dealt with a kid like Ivy. I'm like, well, no one has. Ivy's pediatrician hasn't even dealt with a kid like Ivy. And, this has been a learning curve for me as well. This is just something that I've learned and taken the time to learn. So, I think for a lot of people, there's a lot of fear surrounding disabilities in general. And, this teacher even used the word liability. She just kind of is viewing Ivy as a liability, which is really unfortunate. So, like I said, there were some big problems with inherent ableism in these conversations. That's also been a hurdle that we've had to overcome.
As you mentioned before, Ivy is totally independent and can do anything she needs to do. And so that really seems misplaced as well and judgmental, really.
I mean, it is, again, coming from a place of ignorance. And I don't mean that rudely. It's just she purely doesn't know because, especially with COVID, pickups and drop-offs were always super quick. And we didn't really get to interact with teachers this last year. So this teacher hasn't seen Ivy. She doesn't know Ivy very well. So it is coming from a place of ignorance and just not knowing. But again, I think I was just hoping that this teacher would just kind of be so excited to have Ivy in her class and just welcome her with open arms and be like, oh yeah, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. But that just wasn't quite the reaction that I received, which was super disappointing. There was just a lot of hesitancy and a lot of fear and a lot of, well, how is this going to work? And well, how are we going to do that? And how is she going to do this? And what are we going to do when this happens? And instead of just kind of being like, absolutely, we would love to have Ivy. Let's welcome her into the class with open arms. Doesn't matter what her disability is. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
That just wasn't, like I said, it wasn't the reaction. So that was really disappointing. But, I do love this teacher. And we have had good conversations as well, where she has expressed after some time that she's excited to have Ivy in her classroom. And she thinks it'll be so good for the other students as well to just, we've had conversations about how to talk to the kids about raising disability inclusive kids and, how to talk about differences, how to talk about diversity and those sorts of things. So I know she sees the value in that as well. I think there just is a lot of fear holding her back. But
yeah, I mean, to be honest, if we think about back to our first episode together, we've both experienced that too. And I think most parents have the feeling you're unqualified for these children because you just don't know what to do. And so, really that I feel like it's probably pretty relatable. We're I felt that too, but trust me, you can, you can do this.
Well, you might be unqualified and you might not know, but there's always an opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
And I guess I was just disappointed that she wasn't outwardly showing right off the bat that she was excited to learn. Which I guess I had been hoping that she would be as a teacher. Because you're very right. In my case, I didn't receive a lot of support while pregnant. They treated it like a routine pregnancy. They didn't treat it like a high-risk pregnancy. So I wasn't even seen by an OB, just my midwife. Yeah. They talked about, referring me to an OB, but then they never did. And then, the time comes and she came a month early, but they wouldn't even deliver her in not even our local hospital, because that was never my plan. Our local hospital doesn't have a NICU. So we were going to go one city, like kind of like up from us, I guess, where they have a NICU and deliver her there. And even they didn't feel comfortable delivering her. The pediatricians on call that night didn't feel comfortable. So they actually sent us to BC Children's Hospital by ambulance to just where we would have better care, I guess. They just didn't feel confident. They wanted us to be in the best place possible, which I totally understand. But, and then, so after all this, like even, not even our town, but like a bigger city than ours, those pediatricians didn't feel comfortable delivering her. And then they just sent me home with this baby. And I'm like, hey, well, like, if all these medical professionals didn't feel comfortable caring for her, and now I'm caring for her, like, you're right. It is a lot to learn.
Yeah.
And you do everything yourself. You learn everything yourself. I didn't have anyone guiding me. I found that community on my own, and it was of other parents. I've honestly found the most help from other parents. It hasn't been from any medical professionals. It's been all from parents.
I mean, I'm glad the parents were there, but like, man, these medical professionals like need to pick that up.
Well,
or at least like refer you.
Thank goodness for the internet, because without the internet, I wouldn't have connected with the amount of people I have. And I would be lost.
Amen to that. Like, how did parents do this before?
I don't know.
You could reach your community virtually.
Quite honestly, they didn't do it. These children were often sent to institutions, which is really sad.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So
you're right. So kind of going back to Ivy's preschool journey, I guess. Where did that lead? Like, have you made more progress in that, or?
Yeah, I mean, she's going since the teacher's initial reaction, hesitancy. We've had meetings with her. I made an IEP for Ivy. She's met with Ivy. I hired a support worker. Like, I looked for her on my own, hired her independently. We've met with her. I've talked with her a lot about my goals for Ivy, my vision for Ivy's experience at preschool. The support worker I found is absolutely amazing. I'm so excited about her. I think she's going to be amazing for Ivy. And she's kind of almost even working herself out of a job. Like, those were her words. She said, I essentially want to work myself out of a job. I want Ivy to be as independent as possible, which I feel the same.
That's amazing.
And I honestly think Ivy's going to surprise everyone, because they don't know her, and because, it's just kind of a part of ableist viewpoints. You can't imagine that a life different than yours is still okay. So I think these teachers just don't even know. I honestly think Ivy's going to blow them away with what she can do, because they can't even picture her doing things. Even other kids we meet, they don't even think she can hold an umbrella.
Right.
They can't picture it. So yeah, I think she's going to surprise them all. Because I told them, I'm like, I wish you guys could see our house. We don't have anything modified for her. We don't have anything to get. Nothing. We did buy a specialized high chair, but if Ivy, she is fiercely independent, and she doesn't want to sit in a high chair. She wants to sit in a regular chair like her big sister does. So that's what she does. Anything her big sister does, Ivy does too. And people honestly cannot picture that.
But they will.
Which is kind of funny, but it's also kind of sad at the same time that, people can't imagine that a life different than theirs is still worth living, or that you can still have a beautiful life, or, and that's not the case for everyone, but it is something that happens, and it's sad.
Yeah. And she will teach. I mean, like, not that she's going to preschool so she can have an awesome experience, right? Like, she's not going there to like teach these people. That's not her job. But that being said, like, what a great opportunity for this teacher, for these other kids that she'll be with, to be like, wow, yeah, like Ivy, like, she's legit. Like, I love her. And
if I can just jump in, like, I don't want to ever put that weight on Ivy. It is not her responsibility to teach other people, but you're right. At the same time, it is going to happen.
Right.
And people are going to learn from her. It is not her responsibility. It's not her job to do that, but it will happen. And I am excited for that, because am I going to change a doctor's mind by writing a letter when she's done 40 years worth of research about genetic anomalies? Do I really think I'm going to change her mind? No. But Do I think that we can have an impact on the next generation? 100%. I think that
Mm.
if we start actively teaching kids at a young age about the beauty of diversity, the beauty of differences, the beauty of a disabled life, I think it's going to be so powerful and we can raise these kids to know better.
Yeah, and I think, like, even with the invention of, like, things like, we talked about internet, but, like, specifically,
Yeah.
like, Instagram is because that's, like, an easier way to, like, follow people that you
Yeah.
don't really know personally, and, like, for
Yeah.
us as parents to be educated by disabled adults and to, like, see what their life might be like as adults and to see how much we have in common and how all of our differences contribute to awesome human beings and just all of it. Like, I agree with you. I think that we are being tutored by these adults that choose to teach us, like, you right? Like, if we go
Yeah.
back to, like, it's not their job to teach us, but
Yeah.
these wonderful people that choose to do that. And then, like you say, we can influence also the upcoming parents and they can influence
Yeah.
the next generation, and really
Yeah.
make it a really great community to enter into, just like parents,
I
did
think,
before us.
I just think we can raise a more inclusive generation and we can create a more inclusive world
Yeah.
by doing this, by advocating and by, specifically talking to kids about it. I've
Mhm.
brought books to the preschool. I've had conversations with the teacher about, okay, so what comments are okay for kids to say? What questions are okay for them to ask? What's not okay? When do you need to intervene and correct maybe the words that they're using and that sort of thing too? And because,
Yeah.
I don't think these kids are necessarily going to get that from home because that's just an unfortunate part of society right now.
Mhm.
So I want them to learn it at school.
Yeah, yeah, and I wanna put a note in there too, like, so we're talking about accessibility and how Ivy, because of the way that she is naturally, right, she's like this fiercely independent child who, figures things out and does things like her sister, but there are those kids out there that do need modifications and, accommodations
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
need accommodations, and, like, that, whether or not our children or these adults are able to figure things out and do things on their own, or if they need accommodations, like,
Yeah.
everyone deserves these things. Like you mentioned, like,
Yeah.
everyone deserves to have access.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not, I mean, I didn't really think twice about it before I had Kimball, but,
Yeah.
luckily we get to be in this community and realize there's a need.
Yeah. I mean, something interesting that I have learned, and so now personally, I don't even use the term special needs.
Mhm,
From what I've learned, I think it's a bit outdated. Um, and it puts
mhm.
the emphasis on accommodations on disabled people rather than putting the pressure on the entire world to be more accessible to everyone.
Yeah.
So, like disabled people, they have needs, they have accessibility needs, but everybody has those same needs too. Everybody needs access. Every child has needs.
Mhm.
And it's just that in our case, in the world as it is today, if you're a typical kid, those needs will automatically be met because that's how our world is built.
Mhm.
Whereas disabled kids, the world it's not as inclusive as it should be at this point in time. And so those needs won't be met because the world isn't designed that way. And so that's where advocating comes into play so that our disabled kids can have their needs met in the same way that non-disabled kids have their needs met. All kids have needs and
Mhm.
they all deserve to have their needs met.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't like the term special needs because Ivy doesn't have special needs. She has needs just like every other child does, and she deserves to have those needs met.
Yeah. Preach. And, like, that's another thing I used the term special needs, like,
Yeah.
until, I don't know, until I was educated not to use that term. Like, I think,
Yeah.
we're all learning and, like, trying to figure out what I don't know, how we feel about things and how disabled people feel about things. And I think, like, having another child that, is quote unquote typical, I think really highlights that too, that discrepancy, because it's like, yeah, this world
Yeah.
was made for Wendy. Like, this world
Yeah.
is very accessible to her, but not in the same way it is to her brother. And I think that that's a really I don't know, like a really actually empowering
Yeah.
contrast to see and be like, okay, yeah, like we could make some changes with this.
Yeah. So I know a mom, she's fairly local to me. She has 6-year-old twins, and one has a disability and the other doesn't. So they're literally living parallel lives where access for one child is immediately granted for everything.
Mm.
That same access is being denied to the other twin.
Wow.
She's experiencing that like in tandem.
Mm.
Whereas me, like, I have my eldest daughter, I put her in preschool, experienced all that. So I want the same for Ivy. And now I'm experiencing these hurdles. Whereas, like, this mom with her twins, she goes to put them both in daycare. At the same time that her one child is granted access without questions asked, is experiencing all these hurdles for the other twin. And, sometimes isn't even being given that access at all.
Wow.
So it's interesting.
What a punch in the gut.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
It just, if anything, like highlights how inaccessible our world really is.
Yeah. 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 And I think, it's interesting to me too to realize like how many of these children that are born with like especially medical complexities,
Mhm.
20, 30, 40 years ago would have died. Like Kimball probably would have died actually, undoubtedly he would have died. And
Yeah.
so the world has this influx of disabled people, which is so cool. And I think we're all
Mhm.
kind of scrambling to really catch up, I guess, to be like, wow, yeah, like
Yeah.
stairs are not accessible. Like,
No. I think too, just disabled people have been marginalized for so long. They've lived on the fringes of society for so long because that's where they've been pushed to.
yeah.
Um, and now, the world is evolving. It is different nowadays. And so disabled people are able to advocate a bit more and have themselves be brought into the light to shed light on these issues. Because for
Mhm.
so long, sometimes these children were just put into institutions. They weren't even raised at home. They were just sent off to institutions. So for so long, disabled people they lived on the fringes of society and
Mm.
they were marginalized. And I mean, that is still the case, but we're getting to a point now where with things like the internet and social media and social movements, we are fighting for change.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's such a good point. Mic drop. So I guess I
Yeah.
would love to move on to our next point of tips for parents. There are things that you've kind of learned through this, like such a headache of a process of helping Ivy go to preschool. What would you advise parents who are listening right now?
Mm. I mean, I don't have many tips in terms of like just the preschool issue because we're still struggling with that. And there are some big like systemic changes that need to happen in terms of like BC education.
Mm.
I plan on writing letters and doing more research to figure out what I can do to advocate for her. But, if I could just give a tip in general for any parent who is maybe feeling alone right now or, you know, having any of those emotions that I've talked about, like fear, guilt, anything like that, anything that goes along with raising a child with a disability, I would just encourage you to know that you're not alone in this journey. And I know sometimes it is scary and you do feel alone, but there is a huge community out there of parents. And like I said, thank goodness for the internet because I've been able to connect with so many people and I have found that support. I have found so many resources just even for kids with limb differences. Um, and then there's resources for kids with Down syndrome. There's resources for autistic kids. There's all these little different niches, I guess you could say. And then there's just like the
Mhm.
wider disability community in general. I've connected with so many people with so many different disabilities. And, I've learned that we're not alone in this journey. And, things might be hard sometimes, like this whole preschool issue. But, that's when you can band together. And I've talked to other parents and we're gonna fight. We're gonna fight for things to change. But at the end of the day, Ivy will never be alone. She has an army behind her, and I am so grateful for that.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I love that so much. And I think, as a parent, that is so reassuring to be like listening to disabled people talking about life or issues or, whatever. I think it is really reassuring as a parent to be like, my son's a part of this community. I'm not, but like my son
Mhm.
is. And I feel so secure in this idea of like that they are speaking out more and like,
Yeah.
and demanding justice and accessibility, and that I don't know. I'm like, I'm freaking proud. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
my
Oh,
son's
I do.
disabled. Like, this is such a cool community for him to be a part of.
Yeah. And that's where, you know, that's probably where the biggest journey has been for me, because not even like I was intentionally raised this way, but you are just kind of raised to believe that disabilities are sad.
Hmm.
And so that's probably been the biggest change for me in my viewpoint. It's not sad. Her life is not sad.
Hmm.
It's different, but different can be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So,
Oh, I love that. So, what are your hopes and dreams for Ivy as she goes along in life, and undoubtedly comes up against more discrimination?
yeah.
What do you hope for her and for other all disabled children?
Yeah. I mean, part of this is scary because I do know that she will face discrimination. She will face ableism. She will face some challenges in her life. I do know that. I don't, I'm not just kind of sweeping that under the rug. I do acknowledge that. But, my hopes for Ivy is that she always knows how loved she is, that she has a place in this world. She is meant to be here and she deserves it. She deserves to be here. She deserves a place in this world. She deserves love. She deserves a full life. And I have no doubt that she will live a full life, not only because of like her spirit and who she is, but because of the community that we have found. And then I would also just hope for Ivy that she knows that she is truly limitless.
Mm.
I think the only limits she'll ever face are the limits that people try to impose on her. And I say try because they're going to try and they can try all they want, but they can't limit her because only she can limit herself. And I know she's not going to do that. I can already tell by her spirit and her independence and her fight, her will, her sass. Like she's already taking the world by storm. And yeah, she's limitless. And I've learned this too through connecting with other people. I've talked to Jessica Cox. She is in the Guinness Book of World Records because she is the world's first licensed armless pilot.
Wow, that's
So
awesome.
Ivy literally wants to fly an airplane. She will.
Mm.
Ivy can do anything she wants to. There are no limits. There are no limits for someone who's disabled. There's only the limits that people will try to impose on her. And that's where we'll run into issues like lack of equal access, all that kind of thing. But
Just listening to you too, like I am so confident that you're right about that, that she will never limit herself. In
mhm,
part because of the confidence that you are instilling in her. And I think that, she is so equipped, like having these parents that are so confident in her ability to adapt and to have a great life. I think, I don't know, I would be willing to bet that a lot of the confidence you see in her right now is in part because you don't expect any less from her than you do your other daughter. And I think
mhm.
that goes such a long ways for these kids that we're raising, for them to know that we have all the confidence in the world in them.
Yeah. And like I do love Ivy and I believe in her, but I also have to credit the parents who have counseled me and encouraged me and guided me, because I did have parents very early on,
Hmm.
parents that I met through the War Amps of Canada, and they told me straight up, you cannot treat her any different than your other children. And I remember hearing this when I'm holding a 2-week-old Ivy. And I'm like, what? Like, I would never make Ivy do the dishes.
Mhm.
Like because you're holding this precious 2-week-old baby who was born without hands and you don't know any better. And you're like, I would never make her do the dishes. Like, how would she do the dishes?
Yeah.
But now, like, I'm like, okay, those parents are right. Like, you literally can't treat her any different. Ivy sweeps, Ivy cleans up messes. If she makes a mess, she has to clean it up,
Yeah.
So like I did learn, I have had so many amazing people in my life, whether those are disabled adults or parents of kids with similar limb differences to Ivy's, just be there for me and encourage me and counsel me. So I have learned a lot from other parents, but I am trying my best to do my best for Ivy and to be my best for Ivy because she deserves the best mother in the world. And so I'm trying my absolute hardest to be that for her because she deserves no less.
I love that so much. And like, what a shift, right? Like, I just kind of want to bring it back to,
Yeah.
I guess, the first episode where you're talking about that doctor who was like, she'll have no quality of life. And then you're like, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not qualified to be your mom. And then to come all the way to this point, and she's only 2.5 years old. Like, you guys have like, so much longer in life to continue to evolve and stuff. But like, what an awesome evolution to have to come to this point and be like, she can do anything. I think that is so cool.
Yeah. It's been a journey. It's been, it's been amazing. It's been incredible. It's been hard to confront those ableist ideas that I previously held. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for me to realize, hey, I was kind of, for lack of a better word, a shitty person for thinking this. It is uncomfortable to confront your own biases and, your ableist thoughts, but it's just something that I am now so passionate about.
Yeah. Yeah. It is uncomfortable. And I think our kids are better off when we do confront it and adapt. And, I'm not pretending to be any kind of expert on this either. Like, I feel like there's so much more learning to do and so much more listening. But just being aware that it's a thing and be like, acknowledging like, like I have these ableist ideas that are ingrained in me, just growing up in this society, and that's not going to serve my child. It's not going to serve my family. And so I choose to listen and learn and change.
And, I do it because Ivy deserves no less.
Yeah. Yeah.
It gets hard because that other parents don't necessarily have to have these conversations or put in that time or that work, but I'm happy to do it because, there's no way to put it other than she deserves it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Vanessa, for letting us talk about all this, just all of it, the accessibility, the ableism, our children's worth. It was such a great conversation.
Thank you. I will forever shout Ivy's worth to anyone who will listen. So thank you for letting me do that.
Yeah, of course. A couple of weeks after we recorded this conversation, Ivy started preschool. She loves it just as much as was anticipated and is thriving. She even started up at a ballet studio who welcomed her with open arms. If you want to see adorable photos of her radiating with joy at these fun new milestones, give her mom Vanessa a follow on Instagram. I'll put a link for that in the show notes, as well as a link to my account. After talking to Vanessa, I requested the resources that she looked into to learn about ableism and the history of the disabled community. And so you can find that little list of resources in the show notes if you want to do a little more digging yourself too. Don't miss next week's episode as I chat with a NICU nurse about her inspiration, her best moments, and her hardest moments, as well as a pep talk for all of us. It's a great one. See you then.